All right, this is our second video on this boy's life, and this one will explain and contrast the French concepts amour propre and amour de soi. And so moving on to a distinction that the boys identify with immediately and find very powerful, and so I think is worth the time, is the French distinction between amour propre and amour de soi. My apologies on the pronunciation. Don't speak the language. Rousseau was the philosopher who probably made the most of these. And so amour propre is a love of self. They both mean love of self, but in totally different ways. So amour propre is the dangerous one. And it's the love of self that comes from trying to imagine how others are viewing you. And when you imagine them viewing you positively, you feel really good about yourself and love yourself, and thus move yourself to act in ways that get that positive reaction from other people. Amour de soi is what we might argue the more healthy one. And that doesn't involve going through anybody else's eyes at all, really. It involves sort of the love of self that comes from actual achieved ability to do stuff and, achieved goals and achieved positive things. And so if you think about it, these concepts are linked very closely with the self-determination concepts, because if you fail to be able to pull off amour de soi, like let's say you're not competent, so you can't actually build that kind of self-love, but you still want to love yourself, well, you could see how it's going to be so tempting to put on an act to try to trick people into thinking that you have value. And I think it's tough to argue that that's what happens in the novel. So he fails at amour de soi, and he turns to being dominated by amour propre. And so, again, there's so many instances of this. It's hard to know where to start and end. But here are some quotations, and I recognize no obstacle to miraculous change but the incredulity of others. Again, his change that he wants to undergo in this book is a change in the opinion through other people's eyes. And again, all the stuff with Alice and that little episode of wanting to impress her through his letters and just building this complete fiction. And then again, just the basketball game where, he plays up his injury in order to, he's just completely focused on the sympathy and positive thoughts that the fans have of him. That's pretty alien to him in his life. And then, all the stuff about wanting to go to boarding school and thinking about those guys and how so much of boarding school prep life is such a show and everybody's trying to impress each other, and he finds himself really right in the swim of it there. Again, I think a very, very interesting contrast is his discussion of the Scouts, which is mixed, because on the one hand, he's sort of like, I loved the weird performance of being in the Scouts and earning the merit badges and being able to wear those badges. So there's still a decent amount of amour propre in his appreciation of being in the Scouts. But there's more, I think, because he really does like the idea of mastery that the Scouts provides, right? You only get a badge when you've earned the badge, and to earn the badge, you need some competence. And again, that's what's missing, and it refers back to the self-determination theory idea. And so, his mixed reaction to the Scouts, I think, is highlighted when he quotes, one of the Scouts' founders in that handbook, who is talking about, how jokers, ultimately fail. He says, no man given over to dissipation can stand the gaff. He quickly tires. He's the type who usually lacks courage at the crucial moment. He cannot take punishment and come back smiling. And in some sense, we can laugh at that, right? Of what an old codger who would say that. But, I think Jack or Toby or however you look at it, he realizes that's true, right? And it's not an accident that is included in the book. And then, ultimately this sort of throwaway line, where he's talking about what he actually did learn in the Scouts. He said, the details began to fade as soon as I got through the badges, but I had learned a rough kind of competence and ease in the woods. It was a gift of priceless worth, but I did not guess its value then. And so there's two ways to take that. One could be, it saved him in Vietnam or something, and we'll never know that. But the other is like, wow, the Scouts actually taught me something. It actually taught me competence and the idea that I know what competence is and that you can build it and get some recognition for it. Is that what he means? It's certainly possible that that's what he means, because obviously to become Tobias Wolff, the famous author, he's going to have to turn things around quite a bit. And then finally, switching gears, I think that horrific Christmas scene where Dwight forces everybody to watch Lawrence Welk, and just the vision of Dwight playing the air sax, and because he doesn't have the competence to play the sax, so he sort of wants people to think that he can play, and that he's convinced himself in his own fantasy that the sound of real saxophone players is the sound coming out of his sax when it's not, right? But he just wants to look like he's playing the sax, and he wants people to see him apparently play the sax, and that he's so far gone in amour propre that he actually does this in front of other people. And so air sax, air life, the idea that most of your life could be spent trying to impress people without actually knowing how to do anything that's worthwhile. What a tragedy that is. And I think, Jack realizes that his life is at risk of being such a tragedy. So the takeaways for this video: what is amour propre? What is amour de soi? Which French philosopher first analyzed these terms? Why is amour propre dangerous? Why is Jack drawn to amour propre? And how is Dwight utterly crippled by amour propre?